Good evening. Today on my podcast, we have a special guest. I'm going to be talking to specialist Nicole about the topic of scalping. Scalping has been around in the early 1800s and is still occasionally used today. Hi, Nicole. I have some questions for you today about the topic of scalping. I would like to begin with, what exactly is scalping?
So scalping is the act of cutting the top of the head, usually where the hair is, from the forehead to the back of the neck. The top piece or the scalp is completely removed and taken from the victim.
So what is the history behind scalping? Where did it come from? How did it start?
So scalping is a very interesting topic because it began around 1820. It started when there was conflict between the Indians and Europeans in eastern North America. Scalping was originally believed to be an Indian practice. However, with further research, we learned that it actually began as a European practice. At that time, the act of scalping was considered barbaric, yet it was still used.
So, why did scalping begin? What was the purpose of it?
So as I mentioned before, scalping was used in time of war, but it started because it was a symbol that you followed through with your orders and killed who you were intended to kill. You should be rewarded with money for each scalp that you brought back. It is said that originally you were required to bring the whole head back, but they deemed it unnecessary and changed it to just the scalp. They would perform ceremonies with music and dance to celebrate the scalps that they secured.
That's very interesting, Nicole. How are these researchers able to figure out who was doing the scalping?
So each tribe had its own techniques, knives, and signatures when scalping. By looking at the scalp, you'd be able to tell who had done it.
So, how long was this technique used for?
So it began in the early 1800s, and as war continued, scalping was used more and more. You don't see it as often anymore, but in certain cases, scalping is still used today.
So, was the intention of scalping used to kill their victims?
So scalping was intended to kill the victim, but however, victims of scalping were known to survive.
Was there anyone in particular known for scalping?
There's not any one person in particular that was known for scalping. However, one story that I always remembered was a story of Hannah Dustin. Hannah Dustin was European and was being held captive by an Indian family. She ended up killing and scalping the 4 adult members and the 6 children. She escaped and returned home where she requested a bounty payment for the 10 scalps that she got.
So, I know you mentioned that occasionally scalping is still used today. Is there a difference from when it was used in the 1800s to when it's used today?
So yes, there's a big difference if scalping is used today compared to the 1800s. As scalping used today is thought of a sadistic and cruel act. We don't see it very often, but when we do see it, the killer most likely intends to hurt their victim. So I would like to give you a modern day example from a boy named Jesse Pomeroy. So Jesse was a young boy who was sentenced to life in prison for torturing and murdering other children. But somehow, because he was under 18 and had exemplary behavior, he was released from jail. This is when he killed 2 other children. They tried to plead insanity because there had to be some sort of explanation for how someone could do that. It was later revealed that Jesse had a strong interest in a book about the Indians and their use of torture. So Jesse scalped people and tortured them similar to how the Indians would during war. However, that was encouraged back then. Now it is considered a mental illness and the behavior of a psychopath because there must be something wrong in order for someone to do that.
Are there any well-known modern-day serial killers that have used this method?
So sadly, there are a few. So some of them include like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and Richard Ramirez.
Have there been any remains been found that tell us that scalping has occurred during these times of war?
Yeah, so one of the sites that was found was Estancia Valley, which is located in central New Mexico. So there used to be a large lake in that area, which is no longer there. We have been able to find remains in areas around that lake.
How were you able to tell that these remains that were found had been scalped?
So we were able to tell that these remains had been scalped because if we look at the skull, they have pathological grooves, and these grooves are an indicator that the person had been scalped.
Wow, that was so interesting. Thank you, Nicole, for coming to talk with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.